Is Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Keller Williams Vermont, as well as Strongwell Property Management and Strongwell Real Estate Team at KW. We've got Angela Zakowski, you guys know I'm a big fan of, the Vermont Apartment Owners Association, as well as Chris Rice, who's an invaluable member, is a lobbyist. In today's topic, on one hand, may seem not the most exciting, but I think it's actually one of the most important. And we've seen over the years that when we don't get involved or our profession doesn't get involved, we end up with rules, regulations, and laws that put the balance between the hardworking, safe house providing landlords and the tenants out of whack. So I can't stress enough, we're grateful to have everyone here today, and I encourage you, please stay tuned, and more importantly, please ask what's the John F. Kennedy line, not what you can do for the apartment owners, or not what the Apartment Owners Association can do for you, but what you can do for the association so we can better help you have rules and regs that protect your hardworking investments, and to the realtors on here, your clients' hard work investments.
Thank you, Brian. I think just a couple housekeeping will give people a couple more minutes since the first email didn't work and we're waiting for the second push to go out, is that we're going to sort of break this into segments. We're going to talk a little bit about how a bill becomes law, because I think that's really useful for folks to understand. It's helps explain sort of why the process takes the time that it does and sort of the number of steps that a bill has to go through before it is passed. And then Chris is going to give us some pretty helpful and good tips on how to talk to legislators. Like that is something that is a little bit of a skill, you know, that sort of the art of persuasion. We've been talking about that a lot on these seminars, how to talk to people to motivate them to sort of do what you want. Applies to tenants, the same thing applies to your elected officials. And then we'll save some time at the end for questions. And try to keep it to an hour. So what do you think? Should we just get going? And if folks join us late, they can catch the recording.
Yeah, I think
when I get it posted.
12:05, and we can thank everybody for joining right off and start getting educated on what we can do to better protect our investments and the rights of real estate owners.
Okay. So thank you for joining us today. This is another edition of our landlord management series that Brian and I have been running since March. Did we start these in March? It's been a while, February maybe. So a number of months trying to bring you some topics that are interesting to landlords. And today with us, we have Chris Rice, who is an attorney. He's also a lobbyist, and he does the lobbying work for the Landlords Association down at the State House. So it seemed like a good person to bring in to chat with everybody today and give a little bit of background about how the legislature works and, you know, what you can do to help. So Chris, I will turn it over to you at this point.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. And thanks for everybody for tuning in today. My name is Chris Rice. I'm a lawyer in Montpelier. I've been working on State House stuff for the last 25 years, but working in policy development, both at the state and federal level since the early 90s. You know, the legislative process is not, it's a maze, but it's really not as complicated as what it often seems. It is, and I'll get to the particular pieces in a minute, but it's a deliberative body, and they come to decisions the same way any of your local deliberative bodies do. It's a group of people sitting around a table or a collection of tables trying to figure out what makes the most sense to them going forward. And that's really kind of where the similarity ends. Once you get to the State House, you've got two separate chambers. You've got a House and a Senate. The House is comprised of 150 members. The Senate is comprised of 30. There are Democratic supermajorities in each chamber right now. The House is led by an officer called the Speaker of the House. Right now, that is Jill Krowinski. She and she alone makes the determination on committee assignments. So the House chamber is divided into a dozen or so committees that deal with any number of topics, including housing, taxation, spending, transportation, all kinds of different subject matters. The Senate, its 30 members are also divided up into committees, similar areas of jurisdiction. The leader is the Senate President Pro Tem. Right now, that is Senator from Windham County, Becca Balint. She is elected by members of the Senate to that position. She determines committee assignments along with two other members of what's called the Committee on Committees. That is her, the Pro Tem, the Lieutenant Governor, who is currently Molly Gray, and a third member who was elected by the Senate to serve on that committee, and right now is Senator from Grand Isle, Dick Mazza. Those three people determine the membership of Senate committees. Committees are important, and they're chairs because ultimately it's the committees that do the bulk of the legislative work in any given session. You've got a graphic up on the screen showing how a bill becomes a law, and it shows a lot of the basic steps that we'll cover, but it doesn't really show that the bulk of the work is done on any given bill is done in committee. So if you took a bill that is eventually signed into law and look at all the time that is spent developing that law, I would say conservatively, 90% of the work that's done on that bill is done in committee. More often than not, it's probably closer to 95 to 98% of the work that's done on a bill is done in committee. So your committee chair and your committee makeup, the membership of each committee in each chamber is really important because those are the real workhorses. Basic mechanics of how a bill becomes a law. A bill is a written document that's introduced by a member or a number of members into either legislative chamber. That bill is referred to the Committee of Jurisdiction. And then once that bill is referred to committee, if the committee decides to take it up, they take it up and begin work on it.
So, and Chris, not to sort of, jump you off your stream of thought there, but for housing bills, so things that generally would impact landlords, there's a primary committee in sort of both the House and the Senate that these bills tend to start in. Sometimes, depending on what the issue is, they have to go to another committee, but there's a specific sort of housing committee in both chambers, though they do other things as well.
Correct. Right. So those are called committees of original jurisdiction or a referral committee. In the House, that is the House General Housing and Military Affairs Committee. And in the Senate, that is the Senate Economic Development Committee. That is by those chambers' rules, those committees that have that subject matter as part of their jurisdiction. So take a landlord tenant bill in the House. That would go to Tom Stevens' committee, the House General Committee. Tom is the committee chair. Every bill that's introduced and referred to a committee is not taken up. Most bills get some kind of introductory conversation, but it's a small fraction of the bills that are introduced and referred to a committee that are actually taken up. Time is limited. during the legislative session, and they're only going to take up those committee bills that they feel like they have the time to address and there's sufficient interest in moving them. Committee will work on that bill. They'll make whatever changes, amendments to it that they think are appropriate. And then when they're done with the bill, they'll report that out to, let's use the House example. They'll report that out to the House chamber favorably. As Angela indicated, depending upon what's in that bill, there may be other committees that have to take a look at it. So if it's a landlord tenant bill that also involves some public money or a fee, it may go to the House Ways and Means Committee, may go to the House Appropriations Committee, really depends on the details of the bill.
Or if it's a bill that covers court process and has something to do with the eviction process, it will have to go through the Judiciary Committee. So there can be some multiple steps for some of these bills.
Yep. That will go to the House floor. There's a number of readings that they go through. Preliminary approval, which is called second reading, and then final approval and passage, which is third reading. Assuming that they advance the bill, it then goes over to the Senate. The Senate process is similar to the House process. It'll go to the referral committee, which again, if it's a landlord tenant bill, will be the Senate Economic Development Committee. They'll do their work on it. When they're done, send it to the Senate floor. If the Senate version of the bill is any different from the House version of the bill, those differences have to be reconciled, and both chambers have to agree on a final version of the bill.
I feel like that happens a lot with housing bills.
It happens with most bills. It's pretty rare that you have 180 people agree completely on what the appropriate policy ought to be. So it's oftentimes those differences have to be reconciled, and the quickest and most expeditious way of doing that is often called a conference committee or a committee of conference. Does it by rule have to be done that way? House and Senate can bat different versions of the same bill back and forth until they agree on the same verbiage, but oftentimes it's a committee of conference where you have 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate. They agree on what the bill ought to look like, and then they push it out to their respective chambers to give that a straight up or down vote. Assuming that is the case, and there's agreement on the language and both chambers approve that, the bill then goes to the governor. Governor has an option of vetoing the bill, signing the bill, or letting the bill become law without his signature. Vetoes are rare, but they do happen from time to time. And even if a bill is vetoed, the legislature has an opportunity to try and override that bill, which would require a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers. So that is my kind of schoolhouse rock version of how a bill becomes law. There are a lot of different permutations in the process. And once you've seen one bill become law, you've seen one bill become law. Oftentimes they have very different paths to enactment, but that's the basic process.
And Chris, I think I can say, having done this for a number of years now, down in the legislature, testifying before committees, communicating with legislators, is that sort of any time along that process, a legislator, even someone outside of the committee, can make a proposal, generally if it's on the floor, but there can be amendments made. So there's a lot of different hands in the pie, maybe is not the proper analogy, but there's a lot of opportunities along the way for things that you don't anticipate even when you're in committee to be changing or to be happening, because somebody who hasn't been a part of all of those conversations comes in and says, what about this? And I want to add this. And so it can be kind of flying by the seat of your pants at times.
It can be. It is at best a loosely contained, chaotic process. You hear the metaphor all the time to sausage making, and I would say sausage making is pretty orderly compared to this. But you have a lot of people oftentimes who have a lot of different ideas, best of intentions. They all want to have their say, and they most often do have their say. And getting something from start to finish, from a bill draft to a bill introduction to a law actually being signed by the governor, takes a lot of work. I've worked on both sides of policy where you're pushing for a bill to get enacted, or you're trying to prevent it from being enacted because you think it's a bad idea. It's 10 times more difficult to get a bill passed than it is to defeat one. It's a pretty large endeavor, and the process is designed that way, and that's designed to ensure that only things deserving of support actually become enshrined in statute.
And I think one of the things to remember, or that I'm always trying to encourage landlords to do, is to reach out to your representatives, your senators, and your House of Representatives folks, because that's where partially where they get input from. And I know a lot of landlords feel frustrated by that process, but I think, keep doing it. We have changed the course of bills by flooding legislators' lines with helpful commentary. And I think this is a good lead into sort of the next segment for this, how to effectively talk to legislators. And when we say flood, we had folks who were receiving 5, 6, 7 phone calls from people about the same topic, and they start to pay attention because they usually don't get that many phone calls from people about stuff. So,
well, we just had a question too. Go ahead, please. My apologies.
Oh no.
Well, I'll throw the question out. Does it change when it has, how does it change with housing? And one question that's actually been gnawing at me since we've been listening is what happens with something like Burlington's Just Cause? How is that handled differently than other legislative processes or bills?
Yep, that's a great question, because the Just Cause proposal is a bit of a unique situation where, in order to do that local ordinance change, the municipality, in this case Burlington, needs a change to its municipal charter. And the only way to do that is to go to the legislature and ask for a legislative change. So in a situation like that, you obviously have to get there's a process in Burlington to get the charter change before local voters. Then the local voters have to approve it. Then the charter change has to be brought to the legislature. That has to be introduced as a bill, and that bill has to be passed and enacted into law before the municipality can then enact the ordinance. So because of that, there are a lot of other additional steps in the process that, in the case of the Burlington charter change and Just Cause, they've already done the local work, at least on the front end. So now that Just Cause eviction proposal is incorporated into a pending bill on the House side. There was some activity on that bill this last session, but the committee didn't have time to really get into Just Cause evictions. It's still a live proposal for when the legislature comes back in January. We have a 2-year biennium, so anything not addressed in the first year certainly is a possibility for discussion and action in the second year.
Right. So I guess backstopping against that, any bill that's currently before the legislature has to have some action on it by the end of this next legislative session, or it would need to be reintroduced when the following session starts. So you have 2 years from introduction to trying to have a bill enacted per cycle.
Yep.
So I think, on the just cause eviction charter change, we are going to see a flurry of activity this year because we are entering the second year of the biennium. So if it doesn't get passed out of committee, is it able to be reintroduced next year in a new biennium, Chris? Or
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
anything that doesn't get enacted in one biennium can certainly be acted upon in a future one. Charter change, I'm not, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of a charter change that if it's not enacted in the first biennium when it's introduced, if they come back and try and reintroduce it as a proposal in a following biennium.
Okay. So we could be dealing with that one for a while, even if it doesn't pop out this year.
Sure.
Yep. Sorry, Brian, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No problem whatsoever. I was just curious what bills do you think are happening right now that our members may want to weigh into? And I don't want to take us off topics or if it's off the process, but I'm curious, what bills do you think we as property owners should be aware of right now and potentially advocating for in certain directions?
Angela, you want to take that?
Sure, I can chat a little bit. I think the big one that at least the association is watching right now is this just cause Burlington charter change ordinance. It would sort of fundamentally change the way we handle the end of a landlord-tenant relationship. So what Burlington is asking to do is remove the ability of the landlord to use a no cause notice with tenants, meaning that you would no longer be able to ask your tenant just to leave at the end of the lease agreement. So, those of you who are familiar with this process, that's a big change. And I think that there are a lot of potential negative impacts, not just for landlords, but also for tenants. And this is one of these areas where it seems like a good idea, but when you start thinking about what the impacts are for tenants, I think it's going to create a situation where it's harder for tenants to find housing. It's going to be a situation where once a landlord has asked them to leave, they're no longer going to be able to take cover under a no cause notice, right? Think of how many tenants you have sent a no cause notice to where you probably could have sent them a breach of lease, but you went no cause because maybe then they could retain their voucher or it would be a little easier for them to move. So if that comes off the table, whatever issue that tenant is having at that property is going to be front and center for everybody to see right out there, because the landlord's going to have to tell them why it is they're being asked to leave. And I think it's going to be harder for tenants to find places because landlords are going to understand that they can no longer just give somebody a chance. Oh, well, if it doesn't work at the end of this year, I can just ask them to leave and have them move on. So you aren't going to see landlords giving tenants maybe an opportunity to show that they are going to be a good neighbor or show that they are going to be a good tenant. So I think there's a lot of unintended consequences. I think the other piece to that bill, which Burlington has denied to this day, but if you actually read the language of the bill, is it is going to become a de facto rent control bill. Because one of the components of that is restricting the amount of rent that a landlord can raise and raise on an annual basis. And the justification is so landlords don't raise the rent a huge amount to just force people out the door. Why there's a sense that that happens is sort of baffling to me, because I don't see it happening at all currently, or even if this goes into effect, but it will effectively be some form of rent control in Burlington.
Go ahead.
I was to say the other bill that's not really a bill, and this is where the procedure part gets a little murky for me. So Chris, you may have to jump in here, but there was a bill S-279, which was a inspection and registry bill, which passed, went to the governor and was vetoed. And the legislature did not attempt to override the vetoes in the last session. So I don't know if they can try that again, or if there's going to be a push to reintroduce. So that's another bill to sort of keep an eye on what happens. Really, the nuts and bolts of that one is it would do two things. It would move from the town health officer system, the rental housing complaint-based system of inspections, from town health officers to fire safety, the Division of Fire Safety. So it would take rental housing inspections, and remember, these are just complaint-based inspections. These aren't routine or regular inspections, from town health officers who have very little training in housing, have very little training in landlord-tenant relations, don't have all the technical background, into the Division of Fire Safety, which has a very professional inspection program currently. So that's partially what the bill does. I think it would give landlords a much better inspection, a much more professional look at what potentially is wrong at their property, or what needs to be fixed, or that there is nothing wrong at the property. The second thing that the bill would do is institute a statewide rental registry. From the length of time I've been doing this, this is the most landlord friendly, if you can actually believe I'm saying that, the most landlord friendly version of a rental registry I've ever seen. So the information is for the Department of Housing and Community Development only. It is for them to assess where rental properties are, what needs to be done for the housing needs assessment, to allow them to communicate with landlords when we have programs like we do right now, from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the Landlord Tenant Mediation Program, last year, the RHSP program, because we have no way to communicate with landlords right now as a large group on a statewide level to let them know changes to the tax code. How many of you know that the landlord certificate and how you file the landlord certificate is changing? If we had a way to communicate, we could get that information out to everybody. So the second component to S-279 was this rental registry system. That was pretty much it. There was, I think, some calls to have some additional like study committees and things to look at some ongoing issues, but there's already study committees that are doing that, and the Rental Housing Advisory Board that's looking at different things as well. So those are kind of the two big ones. I'm sure there's always some other ones that just kind of pop up as a surprise every once in a while. And there's any number of bills related to housing that are introduced every biennium. But those are, I think, the two big ones we can expect this year.
Chris, and certainly Angela, I think Vermont Associated Realtors put $30,000 against fighting the just cause. Is there any chance of slowing it down? And who should we be calling as realtors and property managers and property owners to say, hey, this is not just about Burlington. This is about a domino effect, and we need to head this off.
Yep. So let me try and answer your question two ways. Who to call? Anyone and everyone. And I think the bigger question is how to call, right? Because it's anybody can communicate with a legislator, but communicating effectively with the legislature sometimes can be difficult. And I think that's really where well-informed members, whether they're members of VAR, whether they're members of Angela's groups or other associations or trade groups, first and foremost, you want to be informed, right? You're knowledgeable because you're a practitioner in the area as a realtor or a landlord about how to be a good realtor or landlord. Engaging with your local legislator may be something that's a little more foreign to you. And I think you've got to take the time and make the investment to make sure that you understand the policy questions for and against where you are. You also have to understand that your local legislator is doing what he or she thinks is the best thing. Now, what they may think is the best thing and what you might feel is the best thing are two very different things. You have to understand that they're coming at it with the best of intentions. And if you're going to educate them and bring them along and help them understand the issue in a way that is helpful to you and moves things in the right direction from your perspective, the best way of doing that is coming alongside of them rather than coming at them. They're people too. They have feelings too. And I think given you certainly see the discourse on the national level not being what it should be or could be, we're starting to see that at the local level too. Legislators appreciate hearing from their constituents, whether they're landlords, whether they're tenants, whether they're bankers or farmers. They appreciate having the opportunity to engage with them and hear from them. And in my experience, they appreciate the outreach. They appreciate it even more when constituents come to them with a helpful attitude and a positive attitude rather than, hey, you stupid legislator, or you're not doing what you ought to be doing. I'm your constituent and I think you should do X. They'll listen to you and they'll look for an opportunity to get off the call as quickly as they can and never engage with you again, right? That's not an effective engagement, as opposed to, hi, my name's Angela Zakowski. Saw you in the grocery store the other day. I didn't have a chance. I had ice cream in the cart. Didn't have a chance to talk to you in detail, but I wanted to follow up with you on an issue that I think is really important. Like to kind of pick your brain a little bit on where you might be on the issue, but I also wanted to give you a sense for where I am and where I know a number of other people who also were landlords are on the issue. Do you have, 10 or 15 minutes to chat? And I think that kind of initial outreach to a legislator, it's very rare that a legislator doesn't respond positively to that. Now, that may not in the end lead to them saying, oh, Angela, if you'd only told me about this, 2 weeks ago, I could have changed the world for you. It may not turn out that way, but it's a positive encounter that helps educate them, helps them understand where landlords are on the issue. And if nothing else, sets the basis for future conversations between you and that legislator about other issues that you see coming down the road.
Right. So I think, we have a question about what's the most effective form of communication to get in front of legislators. I've certainly found phone face-to-face is definitely the most effective, though that has challenges these days, though I suspect some legislators are maybe meeting with constituents or holding sort of local meetings, breakfast things. I know they run those sometimes. But I would say definitely second to that is the phone, right? Because it's that back and forth email. You can't tell voice inflection. You can't have sort of a natural flow to the conversation. You know, is it something where you send an initial email and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this issue. Can we find a time to connect? So you're not just like calling them out of the blue when it's, you know, maybe not convenient for them. That might be something to think about. But, you know, definitely I would say I prefer sort of the person-to-person approach versus like an email.
And the only thing that I would add on to that is, and most of us don't do it anymore unless you're communicating with a grandparent or something, is a handwritten note. You know, sometimes it's as simple as, hey, Senator so-and-so, I really appreciate your work on this. I value the time and effort you put into this, but I really think that this is not something that should advance. I would ask you to vote no, or I would ask you to vote yes. I think it's a great idea. Sometimes when you just want to convey a simple message like that, that can be an effective way to do that, but it's also a way to initiate whether it's face-to-face or over the phone, voice communication, where there is some give and take, because I think that's really the value. What I would encourage anybody to do is to develop a relationship with their local legislators, so that at any given moment, you feel comfortable picking up the phone, calling them. But equally important is they are wrestling with an issue that might affect landlords, that they feel comfortable picking up the phone and calling you. Hey, Angela, you know, I really enjoyed our conversation at the grocery store. Sorry again about that gallon of ice cream. But I've got another bill in the committee that looks like it might impact you. Tell me what your thoughts are on X. And when you get that kind of outreach from your local legislator, that's worth its weight in gold, because that tells you a lot of things. But first and foremost, that they care about your opinion on it, that they value your insight, and that they see you as a real asset in the policy development process.
In particular, the Just Cause